Hello everyone, it's Chris here. Welcome to the channel and please subscribe if you haven't subscribed and like the videos and spread the word around. And if you like what I'm talking about regarding the books, then read them or listen to them because, even if I speak an hour or more, it's still really only touching the surface of a book. And the book I want to talk to you today is one which I was actually asked about to speak about. It's a startling book. It's one of those books which I wrote, and then I sat back and I thought to myself, "Wow, what did you just write here?" Because it's totally not what I expected. Well, deep down, I think I did succeed. I've heard the rumors, but I didn't believe it was true actually. And it comes down to the fact that NATO, by which I include the US of A, never. Let me repeat that word: never had air superiority in Western Europe or say Eastern Europe, where NATO is supposed to be and nowhere else. After all, it is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's not the one in the Persian Gulf or the one in, Southeast Asia or wherever. No. It was created against a Soviet threat. And in fact, it was actually created before the Warsaw Pact came into being. Not a lot of people know that. But anyway, this book, Blue Tang, it clearly confirmed that NATO never had air superiority in that theater or any other theater. No, that's a wild statement, man. That is like, I suppose, doing things in church which you shouldn't be doing. That's almost like, well, it's mind-boggling actually because I grew up believing in the air superiority of NATO. I grew up knowing that NATO has perhaps smaller air forces, but very, very good ones, and good aircraft and good missiles, good support staff, ground crew, pilots, everything, and they should be able to dominate the air. And it's a huge damn problem. I mean, most of you listening here would know this because you're military men. And you'll understand if you don't have air superiority, man, you're screwed. You can still operate. We did in Angola. We operated, I would say, the last 3 years of the war without air superiority. Perhaps the last 4 years. Our aircraft were just outclassed by the latest MiG-23s, which arrived there from the Soviet Union, piloted by Cubans as well as, well, I suppose, Angolan or two, probably Russians as well. There's strong rumors about it. Definitely, they were not always speaking in Spanish to each other, nor in Portuguese. So yeah, we were listening in. We could make certain deductions, but there's no doubt that the air war, they got the technological overhand over us, and that made operations difficult. Nevertheless, we still conducted the operations and we still won. But in a conventional war, like would have been against the Soviet Union and NATO in Europe, if you don't have air superiority, man, you're going to lose that war as certain as the sun comes up tomorrow. So that was a shock to me. But anyway, this is what the book looks like. It's codenamed Blue Tang. As I said, it's quite pretty actually. I like the cover. It's a thick book. You can see it's substantial. It's about more than almost 500 pages. So it's a long story, 464, around about there. Was book 15 in the series. I really thought that this book would be like a breakthrough book because it was so important, but didn't happen, and who cares? It's okay. It's one of those things. Let's put it back here. And right, so where does the story start? I mean, let me first tell you the story and then the story behind the story, because, like every James A book actually have a story behind the story. There are always certain things from an intelligence viewpoint which I want to bring out and bring under the attention of people, and that's why I write the books. I don't write it to have a good story and that's it. No, it must have some kind of a lesson in it. And if it doesn't, I think it's a worthless book, in my opinion. And doesn't count for much, of course. But basically what it comes down to is BRICS, which I've spoken about so many times. This is the nations which came together. It was Brazil, which has a bigger economy than the UK, by the way, since 2012. Then Russia, of course, was now rapidly heading towards the biggest economy in Europe, and a very, very powerful country, as we've seen, and as I've warned. It's not the old Soviet Union anymore. And then there's India, who's also a powerful country and making major strides forward, weapons-wise, technology-wise. Don't underestimate the Indians. There's a lot of people who are about them. I don't. I really don't. I've worked with them. I've been briefed by them, especially with Mumbai terrorist attacks. I do reveal a lot about that in Codename Caribbean, because the terrorists were not supposed to attack Mumbai hotels. They were actually supposed to attack passenger liners, or preferably one of these LNG ships, blow it up. It will blow at the same force as 55 Hiroshima nuclear bombs. Yeah, Europe, think about that. Yeah. You blew up Nord Stream. You went to US. We know who did it. It's totally no. Can deny until you're blue in the face. What does it matter? It's like that Shaggy defense. I don't know if you remember that song, Shaggy, from Shaggy, where, he starts off like saying, she caught me red-handed. Yeah, no, she caught you on the job. That's true. Yet you deny. You look like an idiot, man. If you had any manhood, you would have stood up and say, yeah, we did it. Mind, it's an act of war. And the result of that is now that the European economy is now virtually at a standstill. It's close to crashing. And you're dependable now on liquid natural gas coming in these big ships. Yeah, that is why we're such a terrorist threat against them. Yeah, I never thought I would see such lack of manhood in the Europeans. But on the other hand, I'm also not that surprised. I lived in Europe for 3 years in Swineland, Switzerland. And what I've seen there made me serious doubts about the Europeans. I don't think they have any manhood left. Perhaps some of them. But I don't think they've got the guts to fight. But, people will say to me that Hitler said that of the US and people in the non-fascist states as well, and that he also thought that the Soviet Union was a house of cards. He just needs to kick the front door and it will come crumbling down. And then later he was recorded actually speaking at a conference in a train, I think in 1943, 44 perhaps, 43, where he said if he had known the truth, he would never have attacked the Soviet Union, which had no need to attack. I mean, they were there. They were, almost in cahoots with each other, but even that you can discuss under history. Simply because the West did not assist with the rape of Czechoslovakia. The Soviet Union was ready to go, waiting for France. France was waiting for Britain. And when those two countries said, no, we're not going to do anything, we're going to just surrender, the Czechs was also waiting. They were docking. They had all the fortifications. They were ready for that fight. They would have put up one hell of a fight. Nothing happened. And that's when the Soviet Union actually entered into this agreement with Nazi Germany to buy time, which didn't help them, but even if they made mistakes, they certainly made up for it. They killed, I think, 600 divisions of the German army. About 10 million men, I suppose. It's really nothing. I mean, the effort of the West in the background is really not much. But that's not what you learn in the history books, is it? And the other thing also is that everybody talks about Lend-Lease. Do you know that Lend-Lease actually had to be paid? Yes. Yes, I remember that arch-sire Churchill. Churchill. You know that hero? That Freemason, 33 degree, the Druidic priest. The one who says he doesn't believe in life after death. No, it's just a black hole. The one who came drunk to cabinet meetings, the war criminal. Yeah. I should really do an episode on Churchill as well. It will shock the hell out of you. But you have to give a man credit as well. He was a guy who could write very, very well. And of course, that was part of how he was bright. He would get his advances, lots of money. And then he would write the story, and he wrote very well when he wrote. It wasn't always. Which is, by the way, Hitler did the same. He was supposed to write a follow-up book on Mein Kampf, but he never did. You know why? Because Hitler never wrote actually Mein Kampf. There's very strong evidence that a Jesuit priest actually wrote Mein Kampf, and then he got executed. Yeah, he was one of the first in the concentration camps who got executed. It's in Oath of Evil, the war on Protestantism. The book I always mention because it is so very important. But anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked now. Let's rather go back to Blue Tank. Point I'm making to you is that I always had the idea that we as a West, because the old South Africa was totally Western orientated, not BRICS. And we really took for granted that all these lies were truth and nothing but the truth. And then I started hearing rumors. I started hearing rumors that there's something very, very wrong with aircraft and with especially with the air-to-air missiles. Now, we knew that too. We knew that in our own wars, our Mirages really lacked a good missile, air-to-air. The French missiles they had were just not good. They were not up to standard, and you had to go from the six from behind to launch. You couldn't launch from the front or from the side or anything like that. Now, at Legacy Conversations, where most of you actually know me, we do speak about these things. That's where we speak to military veterans. And there was Martin Lowe, who was a fighter pilot, and he spoke about the Super Mirage, I think the F1 with the MiG engine. And he also spoke about the missiles, which is very fascinating. If you haven't seen that episode, go and look at it. And then, of course, we have Cobus Turin, also a fighter pilot, who spoke about an engagement with the F1 Mirages against the MiGs, where I think one was shot down and one was just damaged. But we thought that both were shot down. But it came out later that only one was shot down, as far as I know. We record these things a long time ago. He also, Cobus Turin, will speak about the Cheetah, the Mirage Cheetah model, which is not that well known in the West, but that's an episode to listen to. I don't think it's out yet. It might still be a few months, we're so far ahead. But there it came out very, very clearly that South Africa lacked air-to-air missiles. It was a big problem. But I made a few notes, and so let's look at what the notes have said. I think we should start actually with the two buzzwords. The buzzwords these days is something called BVR, which is Beyond Visual Range Missiles. That's where you launch. You can't even see this aircraft. You just basically launch on electronics, on radar, or whatever signals you have. Might even be a satellite beaming down. The South African Air Force at some stage was experimenting with drones. It also comes out in this book. There's so many things which comes out in this book. It's amazing where they would fly a drone at 50,000, 25,000 feet, and that would be scanning, and the fighters would be behind it, and then they would communicate with it. That's when New Griffins. Now, that's fascinating too. That's what I was told. Is it God's honest truth? Man, I don't know. But it makes a lot of sense to me. Of course, since we wrote the book, the Ukraine war broke out with Russia, totally because NATO started moving eastwards instead of staying where they were, where they promised to be. But as they say, there's nothing in writing, so it doesn't matter. Legally speaking, that's bullshit. It's not true. No, that's not true. The only contract which needs to be in writing is where property is concerned, and you know why is that? Because it's registered somewhere else so that everybody can see as the title deed. And in the old days, of course, there was also a rule in South African law which says you couldn't conduct a contract on a Sunday because, well, you really have to listen to the episode on Oath of Evil. And then you'll find out about Sunday laws, which is not the Sabbath day, by the way. It's just it's totally unbiblical. It's a day which the Catholic Church has brought in as a mark of their authority, so it's a mark of a beast. That's what it is. It's going to be a major story in the future. And it's a total contravention of the fourth commandment. Of course, there will be people here who didn't listen to that video and will say, oh, they stopped at the cross. Yeah, the grace defense doesn't work. No. There were two laws. One is ceremonial, that stopped. Yes, you don't need to be circumcised anymore. You don't need to go and cut the throat of a lamb to confess your sins to God, not your faults. For your faults you confess to human beings, not your sins. That's another thing. But go and listen to that video and you'll find out what is the mark of a beast and why it's so important. But anyway, in South Africa you couldn't conduct a contract like that. So those were the only things you could actually write. And there were interesting cases. I remember one where a guy, they were probably sitting in a pub, which makes it also illegal as a contract, because you don't know if a guy is all there, might be drunk, probably was. And they wrote the terms and conditions on a wine bottle, on the label. And of course, I arrived with a wine bottle in court, man. That's the evidence. Yeah, it's interesting. These things, law can actually be interesting. There were also, during the border war, there was something called the Soldier's Testament, which you didn't need all the formalities which you would use in peacetime, which is really not a joke. There's really a certain way you do it and don't do it. I do write about it in some of my books, under my own name, the legal books, but they're so boring, I don't think they are actually in print anymore. But there you could actually lie wounded and write down in the sand next to you, Susie will inherit all I have. And that would be a testament. How are you going to prove that? I don't know. There were no cell phones there to take a quick picture of what you wrote. And no one saw you writing that. So, but theoretically, anyway, that's the way it was. But we believed, and we really knew the value of air superiority. And so this BBR thing arrived. And just a week or three ago, from the time I made this video, which is months ago now, by the time you see here probably, is there was an engagement, they say about 125 aircraft between the Indian Air Force and the Pakistani Air Force. Now, the Pakistani Air Force is actually damn good. If you read Code Name 1 Alpha, which is a book which is about the link between terrorism, by which I mean Muslim terrorism, jihadi, and white slavery. White slavery. Yeah, white slavery. So I struggle to say that word. Which is actually human trafficking is a more formal word they use these days. There's a huge link between it, and in it we describe quite a lot about this very subject, where it was a Pakistani Special Forces and Pakistani Air Force which really overthrew the government which the Soviet Union left behind in Afghanistan. Because it didn't just fall. They moved out, I think, in 1989-90, they moved back. And then the government still existed for 3-4 years, and then only it fell. It's the same as South Vietnam. And I always say this to my American friends, the few I have. It's the same as South Vietnam. If you say to me that, Soviet Union lost in Afghanistan, well, then you lost in Vietnam. End of story, because this is exactly the same. You left the government in place, and that government fell. Bingo, there you go. Same. What people don't realize is, and it comes out in this book as well, is that when South Vietnam fell, the Soviet Union inherited a whole bunch of American aircraft. And there were about 68, I think, it might be 48, but probably 68, virtually brand new F-5 Northrop F-5E Tiger II fighter aircraft. And they assembled these things. Some of them were still in crates. So they assembled these things and they started flying them in their own aggressor schools. And they worked out exactly how to fly these things, how to fly the envelopes to defeat Western aircraft. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But they never told their Arab friends about it. So Israel, quite a few aces and good for them. But if you use that as a standard, and we did, it is exactly what the West did. They said, well, yes, Israel, they're flying the latest American aircraft or French or whatever, American these days. It is a US Air Force, nothing but. And they defeated the Soviet aircraft of Arab nations. Well, man, man, we will beat these guys. No problem, no problem. You see what? We were greatest, we were best. No, you ain't. No, you ain't. No, no, no. The Soviet Union knew how to defeat you. We knew. We just didn't tell the Arabs. Why? They were holding it back as an ice cold. That's clever. That's very clever. That's fantastically clever. The other thing which came out in another book is, I think it's codenamed Annika, but I'm not too sure, is that the Russians actually learned to fly in Afghanistan with helicopters, NAP, or NAP, which means you fly right on the earth. You fly very low, very quick. They've never done that in Angola, as far as I know, because they couldn't navigate. They would just follow rivers and they would be above rifle range, but not above missile range. And they would also sometimes run into our Impala fighter aircraft and then they get shot down. Yeah, that happened. But in Afghanistan, they actually learned quite a few lessons. And I spoke to one or two of them. And they said to me that it was actually worth their while, absolutely, to lose about 50 or 60 helicopters during that conflict because they learned how to fly low and quick and fast. And they could change their flight envelopes, which made them so much more dangerous. So in everything, there's a good and there's a bad. Combat experience is the ultimate place where you learn. At the end of the day, you can be the best general there is, in theory, but unless you're tested, you do have a problem. But to get back to this engagement of 125, 126 aircraft between Pakistan and India, it seems like the Indian Air Force lost about 5 aircraft. Now, I don't know if it's true, but that includes a Rafale and it includes a few MiGs, and I think one Sukhoi. And this was all done with the Chinese having total control of the skies. And the aircraft didn't actually go into each other's territory, so they were launching across the border. Now, they were using BVR. Now, if you read codename Blue Tank, you will see it was actually Indian and Pakistani pilots who used BVR for the first time in the world. It was, I think, at Tritia, one of those places in Africa where one of these unknown conflicts, they were flying as mercenaries. And they used BVR and they did shoot things down. Also, just before this incident with 125, 26 aircraft, there was an engagement between a Pakistani F-16 and a MiG-21 of the Indian Air Force. And the Indian Air Force, they did lose the MiG-21. It was shot down, but they also downed the F-16. Yeah, they downed it. And they also used, apparently, BVR. Now, what comes out in this book is I have a character in the book which is an Israeli Air Force pilot, a fighter ace, well-known one. And it's a man I actually spoke to, not, on legacy because he wouldn't do that. But I spoke to him and he said to me he'll never use it. He will not launch unless he knows exactly what's on the other side. You don't want to repeat of, the US, when Sinus or something which shot down a Iranian airliner, a Boeing or something with, I think, 144 people died because they were thinking it's an Iranian F-14 Tomcat. Yeah, committed murder they made. And the commanding officer was even praised and he was even given a medal. Yeah, you have to wonder about the second beast. It's really pathetic. But anyway, BVR is a great thing which we talk about now. So we do speak in the book, which was written in 2015 already. We do speak about BVR as well. And also, of course, the F-22 and the F-35 stealth. Now, they ain't stealth. Let me burst your bubble for you. They are not stealth at all. We know, we discuss it in several books, including this one, that Chinese actually have phased array radar or something they call it on their ships. They got it from Israel and then they improved it. How could they do that? Well, they lead the world so far in so far in artificial intelligence that the West will never catch up. Forget it. Whatever you hear from Musk and the rest of them is just so much bullshit. You're not even close. Also, about 70-80% of all PhD graduates from the top universities in the US in engineering, they're all Chinese. Yeah. They go home. They don't stay. They don't stay behind. It's not like the Africans, The African arrive, he does a degree at the US university, marries a local girl, he never goes home. That's the way they do it. Yeah. But not the Chinese. They're patriotic. They go back. They become young professors. They have grants to do the research and development work. And because of that, they can build fantastic weapon systems. We've seen it here with Pakistan against Israel. They were dominating. They even had aircraft there they call the J-10, which is also mentioned in this book and other books as well. I think of codename Unbutton, where we worked with Chinese intelligence, where we actually take a long look at that aircraft, and it's a fantastically good aircraft. And we see what happened. There is a South African angle here, but let me first explain the book to you. And sorry if I go left and right. The book is more structured, but for me it's important because there's so many facts which I'm trying to bring out to you in the shortest possible time. Basically, the book is our heroes. Angelique Dawson invites a future husband, but at this stage a bodyguard and chief agent, I suppose, on a holiday. And he, of course, is immediately very suspicious because this is a woman who's the head of counter-terrorism, counter-espionage. She is not a woman who takes holidays. She doesn't take holiday. And even if she is on holiday, she's still the super spy. She's still the spy master. And she's always surrounded by, people like her. And so he knows she's probably up to no good. And the other thing is she wants to fly down to Bufferton, to the missile range there. And he doesn't really want to fly with her, even though she's a very good, superb pilot. She can fly many, many aircraft. And she does, in the books anyway. She's also known to be quite nasty in the air. She would turn that aircraft upside down. She would do all sorts of things. She would make sure that you understand that she's in command and that's it. But she was like that as well, the real one, which we based the book upon. Books upon all of them. All the characters are actually based upon people. But anyway, she goes down to Wifferton. There she meets up with some Israeli agents, and they set up a Spanish Air Force Hornets, F-18 Hornets, to take on the Gripens of 2 Squadron of South Africa. Did that ever happen? I've heard rumors that it happened, but I couldn't confirm it. So, as I say to you in all the books, they are fictionalized. They are based upon something. It might not be the God's honest truth, but the story behind it, the history, the lesson which comes out of it, is extremely important. And there's a reason why you would want to know what the Gripen is going to do against the Super Hornet. Why? Because that is the aircraft which is normally to be found on the US carriers. And if they ever attack South Africa, these are the aircraft who will be involved. So it is very, very important to know what the Gripen will do against it. Especially where the Gripen in the first place have a better cannon, 27mm Mauser, I think, against a 20mm, which is World War II, of F-18. And also missiles. That's the lesson in this book. It's called the Agile Darter, V3E, Agile Darter. It's the best air-to-air missile in the world. There is nothing coming close to it. Not then, not now, with the improved versions, and it's made by Denel. And probably the technology behind it is probably the ones which the Chinese now also are employing, probably the Russians as well. I actually think the Russians are deploying them because I saw them hanging on some of the aircraft, these videos which you see these days. So we talk about that as well, and we also go deep into history. So that's what the book is about. It's very fascinating because what comes out in the book is confirmed later on legacy. One of the great secrets which is revealed here is that South Africa, being a BRICS nation, is not on the side of NATO. If you think that South Africa is still on the side of NATO, it's a Western-orientated country, when you live in a dream world. It really, they've changed. They're part of NATO. They don't want to be anything else. And so what they do is, especially the intelligence services, works very, very closely to BRICS nations. In fact, a place like the CIA, MI6, uh, the seven fishes or three fishes of benevolence, these Western intelligence agencies are seen as enemy agencies. Now, all of them are, of course. There's no friends in that world. But it's not uncommon to see that they work against each other. And especially Mossad too. Mossad will not be seen as a friendly nation at all, a friendly agency, or whatever they are, Bureau Service, whatever you want to call them. Even though in the books there is an unofficial working relationship between Angelique and her friends in Mossad in many, many books. But that's probably against what the government wanted. But she's a woman who does what she pleases, which is why in Code VFO 565 she's actually arrested and detained as a penetration agent for France. And I'm not giving anything away when I say this. It's an open secret. If you read the books, you will know it's there. And it's always hanging like a threat against her. But these missile test ranges, which were built by with Israeli assistance in design anyway, they always invite Western Air Forces as well as non-BRICS nations. Come here, we've got space. Come and test your technology, blah, blah, blah. And then the guys arrive because they're stupid. And then what happens is all the telemetry are stolen. Yes, they grabbed out of the air and then they're stolen and they are given away to BRICS intelligence. And I also say in the book, and in a later book which follows it up, OSTM, it's actually again confirmed that there are submarines lying off the coast at Wifferton in the bay, and they would also, stick antennas and things out of the water and just grab that telemetry as well. And so you can learn a lot. There's a huge espionage thing going on there. It's probably the biggest in Africa right now. And then years later on Legacy, there's a guy called Jacques Detroy, or Jacques Detroy, as the Weko would call him, intelligence officer, former flight engineer of a SAF, and also from JAREC, which is a very secretive part of SAF. And he actually said it in one of his episodes that they had reason to suspect there were submarines in that bay listening in. Bingo, there you go. I'm not surprised. Many times when I sit on legacy conversations and I listen to the guys talking, the pilots, the intelligence officers, they confirm what's in the books. Why? Because the books weren't just written. It's not just fiction. We thought about it before it came out. So that's the other secret which is revealed. But we need to talk where it actually starts. And it starts, like I said, in Vietnam, where 1975, Vietnam falls, and the Soviet Union gets hold of American aircraft, and they test these things. They don't tell their Arab clients. And then it goes over to about 1989. That's where the story then follows. This is the lessons behind the book now, which comes out in the book because the characters will talk about it and inform you about it. Also on how the Israeli Air Force were actually forced by a South African Jewish woman to accept aircrew, female aircrew, into their services. They talk there about a revolt. Yes, there was a revolt from the Israeli Air Force pilots, most of them reservists by that time, but led by I think 2 generals, where they refused to just bomb indiscriminately because it did happen. A guy and his family members were killed. They called it terrorists, but a lot of the family, of course, were not terrorists. Some were very young children. But I've seen what happened since 7 October 2 years ago. We're not going to revolt again. They will just drop the bombs. It's like one fighter pilot in Vietnam, when they asked him, what do you feel when you drop your bombs on civilians? He was like, yeah, I feel a slight judder as the bomb falls away. That's what I feel. Don't care. Don't care. No, it's okay. It's a funny thing because I asked a South African pilot, and then we'll speak to him, we'll make an episode. I said, well, what will you do if you get an instruction to bomb civilians? Because it did happen. The first actually operation which the South had was against civilian striking miners who were all communist and shooting anyway. But technically, not in a war situation, they attacked Johannesburg. Yes, not many people know about that, but I will make an episode on it too. It's very fascinating. Their first ever operation was against their own. And they lost 2 aircraft doing so. But the miners were violent, we have to say. They were revolting. They were trying a communist revolution, and so they got bombed. But, this pilot said to me, look, Chris, you know what? I can get that order, so I will take off. I will go and fly the mission, because I have no choice if it's a legal order. But I will decide where my bombs drop, where they fall. Now that is fascinating. That's fascinating. Because that means I can still play the system, even if the higher ups probably don't realize that. Very, very fascinating. But anyway, by 1989, the Berlin Wall has fallen. Many of you have lived through it. And after the Berlin Wall has fallen, of course, there were no reason for the two Germanys to be separated again, or still. And so East and West Germany became one. This after a most solemn promise from the US and the others who were there. They will not move 1 inch eastwards, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Then came Billy Goat Clinton. Then came Bush. And so it just went on and on until we have this war in Ukraine, Russia, which I'm told that the Ukrainians now have lost about 1.5 million men. They're never going to be the same. It's over for Ukraine. It's actually sad. It's really sad to see this. And you've got now a Russian military, which is probably the best in the world right now. Why? Because they're experienced. They're very experienced. And yeah, there'll be people sitting and say, oh, they can't even. No, they're advancing. Slowly, but they're advancing. Why? Because it's a war of attrition. They move forward, they bomb the hell out of Ukrainians. Ukrainians move back, they move forward, and so it continues. The other day, they talked about let us exchange bodies. Yeah, I think it was something like 1,000 Ukrainian bodies to less than 50 Russians. That says everything. That says everything. But if you read the New York Times and you are under the influence of a Western mainstream media, all I say to you now is like blasphemy, But we'll see. Let the future see who's right and who's wrong. Anyway, so immediately the West German Air Force and East German Air Force combined. They fired all the colonels. They got rid of everyone in the East German military above the rank of colonel, and they kept the rest, and even them they didn't keep for long. And now they have this Air Force, and they have a very good Warsaw Pact Air Force there with them, one of the main ones. And they got the airframes, the Sukhois, the MiGs, and they got their missiles. And now they're going to test it. Yeah, so guess what? Guess what came out of the test? We were told that the Russians and the Soviet Union cannot dogfight. They are on a central command all the time. They would take off. They can barely take off. They're not good pilots. But they would fly according to what the ground controller is telling them. And then they would arrive, and then they would launch, and then they come back, and that's it. Bingo. Well, it's a funny thing because they had quite a few good fighter aces, including women in the World War II. And we know that they flew combat in Korea, and they did well. And we know they flew combat in North Vietnam, and they did well. And then came Afghanistan, and they did well. How did we ever got to that idea? It is where you start believing your own propaganda, and you're that stupid. Be very careful of that. But anyway, to make a long story very short, so they matched these aircraft. Here comes the F-15s, F-16s, whatever the Royal Air Force have, probably the Typhoon. The French arrived with a Mirage 2000D, with their Rafale, and the F-18s, the Americans, F-16s, whatever, you name it, they're coming. And they lost almost every single engagement. Yeah, they lost. They lost. These Germans are flying circles around. Now, you might think that I'm talking nonsense, but if you read the book, you will find, and I mentioned the actual YouTube link, where there's a German Air Force test pilot, where he speaks about this very thing which I'm telling you about, where he confirms it. And he doesn't know about the book. He doesn't know me. I don't know him. It's just one of those things. I just came across it. I listened to it in amazement because everything I was told was actually true. And what was even worse here is that they then started testing the missiles, and then guess what? It comes out that the Russian Soviet Union missiles, air-to-air missiles, is 8 times better. Not 8%, 8 times, 8 times better than the Western missiles. Now we know in Vietnam that they would fire, they would launch 100 missiles, and 92 of them will crash in the ground or miss the target. So they had an 8% chance of actually shooting something down. It's a miracle that they did shoot anything down, but they did. I spoke about Robin Olds, and we'll speak about Robin Olds in this book as well. You know, where they actually laid a trap and they destroyed the Vietnamese Air Force in a few minutes. It was replaced, you know, a week or two later, but they did very well there. Operation Bolo. Research it if you don't know it. But it's in the books as well. But the point which I'm making here is the missiles of the West are simply not good enough. So the Europeans, as well as Canada, even though Canada withdrew later, they decided they need to do something, and so they built something called the IRIS-T, which also saw combat now in Ukraine. And at that stage, it was very well received as a missile. It didn't do well in Ukraine at all. In fact, it did very badly. Many reasons for that. I'm not going into it. Anyway, South Africa also got hold of the IRIS-T, and South Africa also got hold of former communist missiles. In other words, from the Warsaw Pact, from the old Soviet Union. It's now East Russia. This is the early 90s. And this is for the model Cheetah C and Cheetah D. Now, we have a video coming out on the Cheetah, which Colonel Kobus Turino, commander of 2 Squadron, South African Air Force, are actually talking about it because he flew it often. And lots of Mirage 2000 fly-by-wire components and things in the Cheetah. Just want to tell you the Cheetah did go up against the F-15 E Strike Eagle, as well as the Belgian Air Force F-16Bs, not Ds. And guess what? They won. They won those engagements. Yeah, the Americans had to go home. So did the Belgians. Lesson learned, but not remembered. Lesson learned, but not remembered. And then, of course, came the Gripens. Now, we also speak about wherever F-16 and F-18 comes from. That's a fantastically interesting story because they weren't wanted. At that stage, the Air Force wanted a swept-wing aircraft just because the Navy had the F-14, which was crap. It's not a good aircraft, and by the way, the ace, the highest scoring ace with the F-14 is not an American. No, it's an Iranian. It's an Iranian pilot. Yeah. I mentioned that in other videos as well, and I mentioned it in this book because people don't know. They've seen Top Gun, they've seen Tom Cruise there, and they think this is the ultimate. No, the F-14 wasn't even a good aircraft. It was actually quite bad. That I know from personal experience because my late wife told me. And if there's everybody who should know about it, it's her. She was not impressed with the aircraft, and she was not impressed with its engines. Said they were underrated. But anyway, South Africa then decided they're going to build a missile which is better than the IRIS-T, and they did. The Nel then came out, the old Arms Corps, and they built this thing called V3E Agile Data. There are some of them actually lying at Swartkops. We're at Old Air Force Base where the SAF Museum is. We made many videos there. You can see them in the background, I think with a Cheetah D and the F1. Somewhere where the missiles are lying there, you can actually look at them. They don't look like much, they look like missiles, but let me tell you, there's nothing. There's nothing in the world coming to a Denel Agile Data. And they now have, as far as I know, they've now created a medium range one as well, not only short range anymore, but also medium range. And I think they're working on a beyond visual range as well. You know, you hear all these stories, oh, these people, yeah, I suppose there's truth in that too, you know, but the technology and the brain power has not really disappeared. It's just not being utilized. But anyway, it's not for me to protect Denel. They can speak for themselves. We have the best missile in the world, and it's really, really good. That's all we need to remember. But it was a rude awakening for the West. In fact, the only aircraft who could survive against the MiGs and the Sukhois during those training exercises were the French Rafale. Now, many people are going to say to me now, okay, BBR, you know, and that is exactly the argument the US has with the F-22 and F-35, who can't fight. They're not dogfighters. They're flipping useless. They actually, they lost the fight against an F-16 so badly that there came a press statement out that, yeah, but we have to remember that F-35 wasn't optimized for dogfighting, and therefore, you know, now it's optimized. No, you don't have it, man. You just don't have it. You don't have a maneuverability which you need in a dogfight. And that's one of the things which we discuss in Codename Blue Tank, because my late wife had a hero, and that hero was called John Boyd. And John Boyd was a colonel in the U.S. Air Force. So that was strange because he was not in the U.S. Air Force. And always said to me, they can't navigate, they don't know where to land. If she can't find a carrier, then she has to eject. It's a long story, but she had something against him. But anyway, John Boyd was known, I think, as 48 Seconds Boyd. And it's 48 seconds because that's how long it took him to shoot down anybody who came up to him. Anybody. And then he started studying, and he got a master's degree at one of these fancy universities, MIT, I think, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but might be another one, talking now on what I remember, writing a book, but he became like a mathematician. And he started working out, if you look at an aircraft, you look at the way the thing is built, then you know it got certain limitations, and then you know that it can only do certain things. It's not magic, it's all maths. And so he worked out the John Boyd theory. And that John Boyd theory became like the absolute, it's a Bible of fighter pilot techniques. Because if you fly at a certain envelope and you fly in a certain way, there is nothing that guy can do against you, and you can do everything to him. But you have to learn it. It's not instinctive anymore, but it can be. And of course, fighter pilots are a damn breed on themselves. So we talk about him because John Boyd was also behind the F-16 and F-18. He and a friend of his, they were both fighting to get these fighters. And for many years, the F-18 and F-16 were very, very good. They were dominating. But they were dominating against what? And against who? You know, they never really went up against the First World Air Force, ever. And now I see in Ukraine where the F-16s are trying it, they're just getting shot down. I believe 3 of them is now down. 2 of that, they say, was an accident in the sense that the first one was shot down by their own surface-to-air missiles. And the second one was down by an aerial engagement. And the third one, I understand, had technical problems, which is bullshit. It was shut down. The problem also is for the Americans and NATO is that they were falsifying scores. If you read Codename Jen, you will find out, and this is also true, not fiction, you will definitely find out that they would change their scores and make sure that they don't lose the dogfights during Top Gun and Red Flag training, so that they could have a bit more of their self-confidence. So the aggressor pilots had to actually fly stupid to let them win. That's the one way they cheated. The other way is they just simply changed the scores. Yeah, they changed the scores. Now, of course, the F-22 people and F-35, who, by the way, can be tracked. That's what I said with a phased array radar, which the Chinese now have. Besides their satellites and things, they can track this thing at 400 kilometers. So it's not stealth at all. There's nothing stealth about it, and he cannot dogfight. And the argument is, but he doesn't need to dogfight because it's got these missiles, you see, and the missiles will down that aircraft before it gets into range to dogfight. So we don't need to dogfight. Oh, okay. What happens if the aircraft does come into range? What then? You know, that's life. What happens? What if? No, but it's not going to happen. You don't understand. You see now, we've got these missiles. You're stupid. You made exactly the same bloody mistake that you made with the McDonnell Douglas Phantom II in Vietnam. He didn't have an internal gun. You had to put a gun, a 20mm on the belly of a thing, which didn't work that well, because you thought your missiles, the ones where you couldn't hit a target 92% of the time. No, we don't need a gun, man. You know, it's like taking a gun out of a cannon out of a fighter aircraft is like, I don't know, like honeymoon in two separate rooms. Yeah, that's something like that. I mean, you just can't separate it. And then, of course, belatedly, they realize their mistake. They take a 25mm, and put it in a 35. Now the damn thing can't line up with the gunnery sights. It shoots this way while you aim that way. And of course, the readiness figures on these F-35s are so pathetic. I don't want to publish it anymore. I wouldn't either. It's pathetic. And what's even worse is it can't fly during thunderstorms. Yeah, cannot. Because if it's heat, there's something wrong with its skin, honeycombed or something, some technical reason it might explode. Yeah. There's a lot of things which came out in this book, and all of them are so shocking. So shocking, because, you know, I can sit here, I can joke with you, I can be sarcastic, I can laugh at you. But the fact of the matter is, there's a young man and a young woman who's going to take up the challenge. They're going to take off with that aircraft of yours, that crap you believe in, and they're going to get shot down. They're going to die. Yeah. And every time they die and one of those aircraft is lost, your chances of getting air superiority is even less. But now the guys on the ground level, now they're getting bombed, they're getting missiled, they're getting droned. Yeah, you see where this is going. You see what happens when you spend money and you don't get value for it, and you're so stupid you keep on spending money on it. Instead of just pulling the plug. Guys, you lied to me. This is breach of contract. I'm not going to take this crap anymore. Let us get back to basics. No, we've got an MBA defense. You see now, of course, you don't understand life. We spend trillions of dollars. And because we spend so much money, we're going to win. Yeah. You know, Hitler said, Joseph Goebbels, and by the way, was the guy who started the story with an iron curtain. It wasn't Winston Churchill. Churchill stole it from Joseph Goebbels. Yeah. He's the first one, I think, in 1944, who said there was an iron curtain descending on Europe. And then I believe, what was it, 1948, 49? Churchill, in one of his drunken speeches somewhere trying to make money. What did he say? There's an iron curtain coming down. It's the same with his, we'll fight on the beaches, we'll fight. Yeah, you know what? People were laughing at him in Parliament when he said that. I really should make a video on this guy. And then just afterwards, of course, he attacked the French fleet. Was neutral. Used to be his allies, now neutral. Attacked them at Mers El Kibir. You say it like that, yeah, did that. 1,114 French sailors died. The French Air Force then bombed Gibraltar. Yeah, did you know that? No, no, don't know that. Not in history books. And the French Air Force, when they bombed Gibraltar, they made sure to bomb the harbor entrance. They never dropped a bomb on Gibraltar itself. Why not? Because they're honorable people. Yeah, that's why. Because they didn't want to hurt the Brits. They realized this is the idiot Churchill who did this. They call him an imbecile to this very day. They don't like him. I don't like the man either, but, you know, anyway. Anyway, if you don't want to listen to history, history is going to repeat. And once it repeats, people die. Really, we should make history as a subject actually should be in every degree. And it used to be like that. And then about 90 years ago, they changed it. And now you don't get history as a subject anywhere. And if you're American, you can't even read because only 2% of them can understand a GMJ book. Yeah. Look at Oath of Evil. Look at the video which I made for you, where I actually put the statistics out and I say, this is not my research, but I found it. And it shows to you that most of them have a comprehension level of reading of about 8th grade, I think, whatever that is, standard 6. Wow. They even had to adapt their medicine labels and things so that these people can actually read. What the hell went wrong with that country? I can tell you. It became the second beast of the Bible. But anyway, let's get back to Codename Blue Tang. I mean, it's just astonishing the things which came out. And so they lost all these engagements to the East German Air Force, and then they found the South African connection. Yeah, Dieter Gerhard. And I don't mind if Dieter Gerhard comes and speak to us on Legacy. I did send an invitation to the man. He's welcome. For those of you who don't know, Dieter Gerhard was a troubled youth. So troubled, in fact, that he had some problems with the police. And then he got his life turned around. He joined the South African Navy, became an officer. He became actually later what you call a Commodore. Today he's a Rear Admiral Junior Grade retired. But that promotion came afterwards when the Commodores were all promoted to Rear Admiral, which is actually like an American rank, Junior Grade. And at one stage, Gerhard, this is according to the police reports, he says something else. He says he was against apartheid and he started spying for the Soviet Union because he was against apartheid and therefore he's a hero, he's a struggle hero and he's seen as such. But the police reports of the day say something else. And the policeman who arrested him and the intelligence officer said no. They say the guy was actually out for money. He had problems with money. And so he would be stealing and spying for the Soviet Union. And there are evidence, there are tapes where he and his wife, who was Swiss, I believe, she and him would sit there and they would look at the documents and wonder how much money they're going to get for it. Yes, that's what happened. It was all about money. All about money. That's according, I say again, according to the police reports. Where's the truth? I don't know. Perhaps Dieter Gerhard should come to Legacy and explain what's the truth, and he's welcome. He's welcome to come to us and tell us. But I doubt if he will. I don't see it. But anyway, so one of the things which he then stole and sold was actually the helmet system called the Kukri. Now, the Kukri was a South African development where there's a helmet on a fighter pilot. It's got like a dot sight and it's linked to the missile heads. So what happens is the guy looks that way and the missiles would start tracking that way. And so he can just look there and shoot. That was in the 1980s fantastically advanced. In fact, it took the US and the poor Brits, oh shame, it took them until 20, 30 years later before they could even get there. And they too, after the 1990s, got hold of a Kukri system, then they redesigned it to something so ridiculously advanced that it doesn't work. Yeah. Apparently, you can look down to the floorboards and you see right through the aircraft with the sensors what's below you instead of seeing where you're flying. No, it doesn't work. Talk to many pilots, said to me, it is overcomplicated, like the entire Western military. It's overcomplicated and it doesn't work. Just about money, guys. That's all it is. It's all about the merchants of death. But anyway, it seems like the East Germans and Warsaw Pact people had hold of the cookery systems, and they were implementing them in their own air forces. And they probably having to this very day. That is the South African connection, which many, many people don't know about. Now, it is shocking the things which comes out in this book, you know. I don't even know. When I started writing it, I couldn't know that all of these things are coming out. I knew about these things, but it just followed into the story all the time. And then I thought I have to look at Mirage F1 losses on the SAF as well. They lost quite a few through the years, not all in combat. So there's a history of 2nd Squadron, 2 Squadron of the South African Air Force, which is the premier fighter aircraft squadron. They were ones who now flies the Gripens. Okay, a lot of people say to me, "Oh, the Gripens don't fly." I don't care. In the books, they fly, right? And a lot of the things in the books are test. It is military. It's military doctrines. I mean, you look at it and you see, right? If the Gripens are flying, and if the Gripens have the agile data system on them, and if they can use these high-flying drones of theirs, and if they should crash with the F-18s from the US aircraft carrier coming to bomb somebody or whatever, or giving top cover to Navy SEAL team that's running away. Read Codename 1 Alpha again, the human trafficking book. That's where we actually test by faking a US Special Forces team on the run, the Duku around about there, to see how far they can get. And the answer is not far. No, not far. They won't get far. We'll track them down and we'll kill them. Don't try your luck here. This is not Somalia. You'll see your ass. But anyway, in the books, these things are flying. And so we need to know if a Gripen goes up against the Super Hornet, what's going to happen? It doesn't matter what happens if it goes up against a F-22 or F-35 because the damn things can't dogfight. I wanted to know what will happen in a dogfight between a Gripen and the F-18s, and the answer is I'll shoot them down. That's the answer. And if you look at the simulator flights which they were doing across the world, and that was a bit difficult to get as well, because remember, the Gripen is a Western aircraft, so it doesn't really recognize the F-18 and F-16 as enemies. It will recognize immediately the Sukhois and the MiGs and the Chinese J-10s and those things, Chengdu, and all those things they will recognize as enemies. But to get the software written for an F-18, F-16 to go against the Gripen was quite a story. There's an entire espionage effort which went into that, which I mentioned in the book, but I don't expand on it. Yeah, there's certain things we don't need to tell to everybody. But yeah, if you look at the simulator testing, you will find out that I don't think the F-18s are going to make it. And then something else came out. I mean, we in South Africa, we always complain about the SAF with reason. You have a fantastically good Air Force. One which was better than the Israeli one in the sense of they could reload, rebomb, rearm quite quicker than what the Israelis could do. And they were very, very good. And then lack of funding. And so now the pilots were still well trained. There was a time when, they came with this, that you have to get affirmative action pilots in. At that time, they told me it's sort of gone now. And the pilots they train now and who graduate are actually worthy of their wings. But like any military where there's changes, massive changes, things do go wrong. But whatever, at the end of the day, they don't fly enough because there's simply not enough money dedicated for fuel and maintenance and things like that. So yeah, that's a big problem. But the bigger problem what came out in the book is that the Chinese Air Force pilots, and this is also in codename on Button, is flying something like between 160 and 180 hours a month. Guys, that is an unbelievable amount of flight time. because that is basically what a US pilot will fly in 1 year, if he's lucky, sometimes even 2 years. Because remember now, it's not a bomber. A fighter pilot flies an hour or two and then he's back home. He's not flying for hours. It's not like in a Dakota or in a C-130 or whatever, and he's flying for 8, 9 hours, 10 hours, and then he lands and he built up all those thousands of hours. No, these guys are actually relatively low hours, and therefore they don't have the experience. So therefore now we're back again. What you gonna do? What you gonna do, Mr. Fighter pilot from NATO and the US? With your lack of flying hours, your lack of flying skills, your lack of flying equipment, meaning that you're flying shite, your lack of missiles, which is shite, your lack of a decent cannon, which is shite, and now you get up against something like the Chinese who's been flying in 1 month more than you fly in a year. How's that going to turn out for you? Yeah, it's like me touching my nose, you know. It's game over. It's game over. That's what it is. And many people will not believe that. They get extremely angry when you say these things. They're like, no, it's not true. I have the evidence. I wouldn't write it in the books if I don't have the evidence. It is there. It's in public knowledge. We know that. And the thing is, when you take an Air Force and you start flying all these hours, what happens is the Air Force gets moved. In other words, those mechanics, those ground crew, those operators who controls the flight traffic, you know, those type of things. Everybody gets like into the act now because they have to. So the entire thing gets oiled. They get moved. We're used to combat operations now. And the US and NATO is not. All they are, they bomb what? People in sandals with AK-47s? That's an experience. Why they get medals for that, I don't know. You just have to fly there, drop your bombs and go home. What's your chances of being shot down in Afghanistan? Very little actually, because unless you go low enough for, for the old stingers. Oh, there's a story about that as well. So during the 1980s, when the US was supporting the forerunners of the Taliban, in Afghanistan, they gave them a whole bunch of stingers. Many, many stingers. Lots of stingers. Hundreds of them. And then after the war, they realized, oops, these guys can use these things for against ourselves, against airliners, things like that. And yes, I did. Yeah. In Africa, 2 of those stingers ended up shooting in Kenya at the Israeli El Al. Yeah. But they got defeated. The Israelis had these sensors and things, they could defeat them. Yeah, that happened. And so the US got out and they started offering up to, I think, $1 million a stinger to get them back. And they told the entire world that, it doesn't really matter because, the battery of a stinger would run out. Then it can't work anyway. And since it can't work anyway, it doesn't matter. It's just a, it's there, but it's not that important. But then, yes, why were you so concerned about those missiles? And of course, the leader of the world these days in surface-to-air missiles, it would be who? Russia. Yeah, there you go. Russia, China as well. Very, very good surface-to-air handheld missiles and pads. Read code name GSSP-40, the book's about the Hegelian dialectic, which I describe in the episode where I spoke about Oath of Evil. I have a 10-15 minutes explanation on what is the Hegelian dialectic. You better know what it is, because it's happening as we speak. And it's going to affect you. It's going to affect your children. It's going to affect you. It is dangerous, the games they're playing. But anyway, in that book, Angelique and mates are flying in a C-130, and they are actually shot at by these manpads, and the aircraft is hit. And they had to abandon the aircraft. It's a long story, a fantastically good book. Called it after my late mom. She was still alive when I wrote it. It's initials GSSP. And she was born in 1940. And she lived about into her 80s, and then during the great illness. Our newly trained doctors in South Africa put her in a ward where the other people had this great illness, whose name I can't even mention, and she went into a coma and she died. That is despite being injected twice against my wishes. So anyway, this is Codenamed Blue Tank. It's really a book which you need to read if you want to understand fighter aircraft, what's going on in the world, the real threat of losing air superiority as you lost already. It's a technical book. It goes into detail what I've just said to you, and it's just a good read. It is available in hardcover, softcover, as well as Kindle, as well as in audio. I don't think it's in South Africa. It's only on Amazon. You'll have to get hold of it there. Lots of things happen in that book. The aircraft which Angelique and Foxtrot are flying to down south, that thing is sabotaged. She has to make an emergency landing at night. All the instrument lights goes off. They do take revenge for that in OSTM, the book following on. There's all sorts of things happening there. We also look at the L-39. It is a training jet from the Soviet Union. They also fly with that thing around. Yeah, man, that is fantastic. It's really, I so enjoyed writing that book. I hope you enjoy reading it or listening to it. And until we meet again, God bless, man.